You're listening to the Better Two podcast with DM Needham. Hi gang, Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better Two podcast. Today's guest is Zehr. Jerry and I have a very enlightening conversation as we talk a lot about spirituality. Jerry, his grandparents were Amish and his parents were Mennonites. But Jerry at a certain point decided he wanted to pursue a dream in Hollywood. And he kind of walked away from that and moved out to LA, not really knowing a lot. He said he was very naive. And after being there for a bit, he realized that he was going to succumb to the trappings of Hollywood, and not in a good way. He was searching for something out there to fill him, to make him whole. But he wouldn't find that until he started doing a spiritual quest. And that's what we discussed today. So enjoy. Hi, Jerry. How are you doing today?
Good. It's good to be with you and your listeners today. Thank you for inviting me.
You are welcome. So you are in Indiana currently.
Yes. Carmel, Indiana, outside of Indianapolis.
Okay. So, but that's not really where our journey starts. You grew up Amish.
Well, my grandparents were Amish, northern Indiana. By the time I came on the scene, my parents had become Mennonite. So the Mennonite are a little more progressive. We had radio and TV, and my father, did pretty much our lives were there. My mother still wore a prayer hat when we went to church on Sunday morning, and it was a very conservative, legalistic kind of background. You don't drink, don't smoke, you're going to go to hell for all these things. But it wasn't as conservative as the Amish was.
So there was a little bit of freedom. Now, when you went and visited your grandparents, I take it you did visit them. How much of a culture shock was that, comparatively speaking?
Well, as a young kid, I didn't want to go to Grandpa's house because they didn't have a TV. And you worked in the garden. You worked as a child. It was so I didn't really know them well. I mean, I didn't, because by the time when we were there and I was in school, I was involved in school athletics and theater and doing these things. So they didn't really understand a lot of that. But the thing I appreciate about the Amish is their value of the land, care for the land, family. They're pacifistic. So, there's some good things out of that. I think that the things that I had to work against was a lot of the shame and guilt. There was a sense of God is a judgment, the idea that God's out there going to come in and strike you down if you do bad. A lot of my Catholic friends and Jewish friends had said they experienced guilt too, Later in life, I came to have a different understanding of God and saw God as a God of love and joy and grace. But in those days, I carried some shame and guilt from that. Never felt like I measured up.
Well, I mean, you bring up a very valid point. A lot of people talk about Catholic guilt. While I am not Catholic, I have been accused of having Catholic guilt at times. And the funny thing is, what is guilt? But guilt is something to control you.
Right. And I think they meant well at the time, that they wanted you to stay on the narrow path, don't fall into temptation, don't fall into those things. But unfortunately, and this comes even back from the Greeks where saw the body was evil and the spirit was good. So you came to not trust your body, not trust your emotions, not trust your feelings or your sexual urges, saw those as of the devil. And then, but the spirit is good. And so you had to fight against it. Where in many of the faith traditions, and even in Judaism, there was an integration of body, mind, and spirit. And we've evolved in that. And I must say, even much of Christian thought has left some of that guilt and shame and see this integration in a positive way.
I think it's interesting, as you're talking about this, I can't help but think, we talk about technology. I've talked about technology and social media on this show a lot. And when you think about how far technology has come and think back to when you were a kid going to visit your grandparents, and they're still not really touched by technology, are they?
Right. No, they weren't. And there's some good things about that. There are some good things about that. The thing I appreciate in a positive way about our technology today is here we're having this interaction. We have interaction with people around the world. And I think we're finally realizing, as we kind of have a raising of our spiritual consciousness, that people of all faith traditions, people of cultures, we're all one in humanity. And so it's not such a narrow parochial vision of the world and of others. Back then, if you never met somebody who was gay or black or Jewish, they were suspect and you didn't trust them, And I still have some of my family members who are kind of like that, and they're very fearful because of all the change going on. And yet I celebrate the diversity, the openness that we could come to have. And to me, that really is at the foundation of God is of love. That was what Jesus of love. Now, the church, I think, tried to control with guilt and shame, and maybe meaning to do that in a positive way. But I do think we're evolving and saying a lot of those doctrines and dogmas were man-made. That wasn't the original teaching of Jesus or Buddha or any of the great teachers who have tried to help us have a higher consciousness of love, of ourselves, and of with God.
Well, and when you want to talk about narrow parameters, if you think about the Catholic Church and the fact that priests cannot get married.
Right.
What did that really do? I mean, so you closeted people into having relations that they should not be having, which is technically a sin. So basically you're asking these people to preach the holy word and act like they're above everything when they're actually closeted doing the sin.
Well, and again, probably the idea was you be celibate, you have the church as your bride, you give your whole life to Christ, you live in poverty. So, you can give that to the whole church. And the Catholic Church has done many positive things for the poor and yes, advocates, especially in South America and in the world. Maybe, we've seen kind of because of the abuse and child abuse and some of that in the United States. In the larger world, some of that others have been some good things that have happened. So, it's one of those things because religion, I have friends who go, I just don't believe in God because I've seen all the bad things religion has done. And I always say, don't blame God because of our human nature and our human sin, but find the core teachings of that Jesus was about love and forgiveness, for Buddha or for Baha'u'llah, from the Baha'i faith. When you see these teachings of all the great wisdom teachers, it's all about forgiveness and grace, empowerment, knowing the divine within you and trusting yourself and living that out, giving that to others.
Well, and that's one thing I have said this many times to many people, that religion, there are certain tent poles that if you take away all the artifice, meaning the name of God, we all hold a lot of the same traditional meanings. If you really take and unpack it, it's just somebody along the way has created this doctrine to go along with their ideology.
Well, that's right. I mean, I've been working as an interfaith minister for 35 years with all the different faith traditions. And because of our human nature, being competitive, and especially in the United States, we are very kind of competitive, capitalistic. So I'm better than you. And if I'm right, you must be wrong. How could we both be right? And even, I was a minister for 36 years in a church, and ministers were competitive. My church is bigger than your church, which meant I was a better minister than you were. Well, when you buy into that materialistic or capitalistic mindset that in our country has, that competition I mean, competition can be good in some ways, but it can also be unhealthy when we always have to be over against one another. And I think in our country, that's something that we're trying to work with. Certainly, I've been about building relationships and unity, finding that which we have in common and try to bring healing to our world. Because I think that idea of I'm better than you, or it's not enough, you're not good enough, those are all man-made things to drive people to buy more products because these companies want you to buy there and make more money. And so we kind of have to get clear from that to learn how to believe in ourselves, trust in ourselves, and respect another human being. That's a shift from our, kind of society norms.
I agree. And, here's the thing. I'm a minister as well. But I mean, I'm a licensed minister. I have married people. But the reason I got my minister's license is because there were certain laws in the books because I do read cards. And I could go to jail if I were reading cards. So I needed a minister's license to be able to do what I do and counsel people.
All right. And in one way, I believe, we're all one as children of God. We all have our connection with the divine within beyond us. Now, is there value to having ministers? Yes. It's like having a coach. You guide somebody. I studied the scriptures. I studied therapy. Yeah, or a therapist. But when you give your power away to another person, then you're losing your own identity rather than, let me listen. Like people are listening to the podcast today. Some people will like what they hear. They might take it and embrace it. Some people say, no, that's not my thing. And that's good. I think questioning, searching, trying to be open to new understandings is the way we raise our own consciousness, and come to a new understanding for our life in the world.
It is. And here's something else to think about. So I want to go back to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I know you're going to be like, why? Well, it's the whole comment, excuse me. It's the whole comment with the proper cup. And the proper chalice he picks is a carpenter's cup. But when you look at the ostentation, and I'm not just going after the Catholic Church, when you look at the ostentation of the mega churches, of the Catholic Church, all the ornation, is this really what God was about? Or is this back to kind of a tantamount to false ideology?
Right. And I think that's some of our own immaturity or our own growth. Immaturity is kind of diminishing, but maybe just to say our own growth as spiritual beings, that we're here on earth trying to come to a new understanding and we're working things out and we have evolved. I mean, think about where we were in the Middle Ages or even in the 1940s. We've made some wonderful headways. Yes, we have a long way to go, but I want to celebrate. And so that's why I'm always saying to people, I can tell you everything I don't like about Catholics or about Mormons or Jews or Hindus, but I would rather focus on what we have in common because really I believe we have so much more in common than what divides us. But it is a choice. Some people want to choose to be over against, to sometimes it's their insecurity that they need to feel better about themselves in a way to diminish another. But when we can finally come to love ourselves, believe in ourselves, trust ourselves, now we have something to offer and to be in dialogue and value somebody who even disagrees with us, which is fine.
Well, and like I said, I'm not bashing churches.
Right.
It's just the fact that when there are so many people that are suffering and you have this ostentatious thing, we'll go back to one of the hurricanes in Houston and certain people's churches, I will not name names, but most people will know what I'm talking about. The church doors were locked. People needed a sanctuary, but yet this person sits there and preaches and this person's worth a lot of money, but yet they weren't there. So if you really are doing God's work, whichever God you believe in,
right,
why aren't you opening those doors?
Well, and again, I think when you go to the very core teachings of all of our great wisdom teachers of the different faith traditions, they all focus on compassion, forgiveness, and love, on helping to empower one another, give dignity to each other. Those are at the very core teachings. So that karma is kind of the word everybody says now. And, karma was in the Hindu traditions. And Jesus says, you reap what you sow. Now that's at the core for Jesus, was whatever you put out there will come back to you. So if you reap, if you out there planting seeds of greed or selfishness or vengefulness, that will come back to you. And there are those in religion, the same way there are those at Wall Street, or those, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the more power you get, the more difficult it is. And back to the original days when I was saying about that legalism of church, they were trying to keep you in the narrow path. It just was out of fear rather than love. And I don't think fear is any good way to live your life. But, when I was out in LA, and my previous life, I was in the entertainment business, and I'm out there trying to make my fame and fortune. And really the question I was dealing with all the time was, what am I willing to sell my soul for? Because everybody was trying to move on the ladder of success. And there was a sense of each relationship was transactional. What can you do for me? Now as I got out of that, I just have relationships, genuine people who care about me and I care. And how rich. But in those days, when I was out in LA, I felt very empty inside because there was nothing feeding my soul, because it was all about the external, the accolades, getting affirmation from others, and seeing how bigger, more famous, more money I could make, which gave me a sense of power and then also influence. And then I felt good about myself. But it was all opposite.
But isn't that really what social media does now?
A lot of social media.
I mean, in general, and I'm talking about the younger generation, because now, of course, Instagram has gotten slapped because you're setting up girls and people to feel inadequate.
Yes.
And that's the thing. It's like, instead of trying to look inward and figure out, why do I feel this way, you're looking outward. And I had a guy on the show. He was 14 at the time, and he's in Australia. And he said that he, at 14, he was like, he didn't feel like he fit in. And he said to himself, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that perfect Facebook picture. I'm going to work out. I'm going to look good. He got the perfect Facebook picture. At 16, he snuck out of his parents' house and jumped off a roof of a building.
Yeah. Right.
He survived. He's finally starting to gain some use of his legs in his 20s now, and he's an advocate for trying to prevent suicide. But it took him to go through all of that to realize that what is outside is not necessarily going to give you what you need.
Yes, yes. And that's at the core, isn't it? That it's when we finally learn how to love ourselves and go inward to affirm that. And that, it's interesting. Jesus says, they ask Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? He says to love God and then love your neighbor as yourself. Well, we forget that about loving ourselves. We think about, loving your neighbor, helping other people, be compassionate. But until you can love yourself and really affirm yourself. Now, I must tell you, it's been on a journey. In my 20s and 30s, I didn't think anything about myself. I've had a low self-image. I was looking for affirmation from other people. And you're right, that social media accentuates it. But even before we had Facebook and Instagram in the 50s and 60s, those people were still struggling with the same way. I mean, success and material and power, the idea of looking inward, having a spiritual life, that's not as exciting. It's not as tantalizing, and so until you get some maturity, or maybe you've gone on your journey like I did, and then you found out I was very empty and I didn't want to live a life like that. And in fact, I could see that if I continued to live that life that I was living out in LA, I'd be dead in 5 years. because, I was partying, I was doing, drugs, I was out trying to hobnob and do all that stuff. And it was very empty. And I wanted something more for my life. And I think many people want something more. It's just that some people don't know how to find it, or they're afraid to take that step. We get settled, we get into a routine, and maybe we feel we don't deserve that life, a good life, because of our upbringing. There's a lot of things that can block us. But I want to suggest in the positive way that social media, like your podcast, other people's podcasts, there's other, great meditation apps. There's other books like my book and other people who write things to help us find a way of improving. So I think social media is like anything. It's how it's used. And then we choose for our own life.
Well, you have to not be doing this. It's like, we'll talk about the podcast for a second. You can't get into doing podcasting because you think you're going to be a huge success. You're going to get a contract. You're going to turn into Joe Rogan or whoever. You can't get into it thinking that way, because if you do, you're not going to find the reward in it. If you look at your stats and you see that you're reaching different countries and you have an audience, even if it's 10 people, you still are communicating with somebody. So the premise of the bad side of social media is the likes, the need for that outside validation, or as you were describing, the best way to describe what you were saying was keeping up with the Joneses. And the funny thing is, during the 60s, and I mean, I was a baby, so that I don't really know, but during the 60s, everybody was talking about, the hippies, they were so enlightened. Let's be honest here. Let's really unpack that for a second. Were they enlightened or were they high?
Well, I think the high was an outcome. I think they were trying to break out of the mold. Yeah. I think there was a breaking out and opening up of consciousness. Now, being high, was some of the after effects, but in a positive way, I think, we are evolving. We are moving to where there's an openness and respect. And it's generationally. The whole idea of somebody being gay as wrong is kind of anybody under 40 just goes, come on, you got to be kidding me. Two people who love one another, what's the issue? And that's the same way with many other things, right? That it becomes a generational thing of our moving. But I think you're right. I think at the core, the question is, what gives you meaning and what do you want your life to be about? To be that point so that at the end of your life, what do you want people to say, what was your life? What gives you meaning? And listen to that desire inside. So for me, what gives me the most meaning is my encouragement of people, helping other people come to find some self-love and encouragement and healing. Now, I wrote my books, and I'm like you. I don't even look at the sales. People say, well, how many books did you sell? And I don't even want to go that way because I didn't write the book for that reason. And I get some wonderful feedback, and I get people who read it and have found some satisfaction. And that means so much more to me. I'm not going to become a millionaire in books because authors get 10% royalties. That's not why I did it. It's not why you do your podcast, right? I mean, if it does go, that's fine. But if your motive is just to make money, people can feel that. I mean, again, that's that transactional relationship. And then it's like, you just want to be my friend because you want to know my friends and you want me to help. Well, that's not genuine relationships.
But haven't we with the gig economy and with social media, haven't we turned a lot of our relationships into transactional things?
Well, I think it's just by nature. I mean, again, that is something new. It's been that way back in the 50s.
It's just changed. Here's the thing. Relationships you could build a little bit better back then. They were not so quick. Now it's like, I clicked the button. We're friends now. Okay, let's go. I'm going to drop into your DMs and I'm going to solicit business from you.
Right.
What?
Yes.
I mean, at least before, dare I say, maybe somebody bought you lunch.
Yes. Well, I think it is heightened. I definitely think, And I appreciated my daughter because my grandkids, even when my daughter we didn't have so much social media. So our thing was about how much TV you're going to watch. But my daughter was so good with our grandkids about how much on the social media they're going to be involved in, because, go out and play, interact, be involved, read a book, do other things, so that it isn't all about checking your email and your Facebook every 10, 20 minutes. And so that, that's again, though, part of what I found. People, we're not there yet because still the social media is all so new. But there does come a cycle where people finally disengage and go, I want something more. And that's when they start to look inward, maybe from a podcast or from they're reading a book or seeing something on YouTube. I mean, I love YouTube because I listen to certain music. I listen to talks that enlighten me. Now, and again, that's some of your maturity as you go through life. Reality, most people in their 20s, until they get to be about 35, in their 20s, they're about making their career. They're like to do things. The wonderful thing, it's interesting, people, when they got out of college, back when I was interviewing people, that their most important motive was to make a lot of money. Now, when you ask people who are getting out of school, what's the most important thing for them? They want an experience. They want to experience. So a lot of people are not going into the market right away. They're traveling on backpacks, and they're doing other things. I think the millennials are that next generation who's coming out of college. Actually, is good. There's going to be a shift. We're not anywhere there yet because they're not in positions of power. But I think there are some corporations actually who are hiring, you have your CEO and your CFO. There's corporations who are hiring CPO, certified personal officer, purpose officer, helping people find purpose in their life. They're realizing that if you're working in this corporation at Amazon or whatever factory, and helping them find some purpose and meaning, because they know people just get burned out if they're working 60 hours a week.
Well, the thing is, it's not just factories, though. I mean, that can be transcended to office work. I mean, I worked in the insurance industry, and at a certain point, it was the hamster on the wheel. You just went, and you didn't. I mean, you get burned out. And I knew people that could handle being there 20 years and not a problem. Not everybody is like that. And that's the thing. Some people can handle doing those hard pressed things. The younger generation is definitely, they're not as willing to take the stuff that my generation is, or that your generation was. And I want to touch on something. You said that, people that are under 40, being gay is not a big thing. I think also the thing is, it depends on where you're born at. I grew up in New Orleans, right. And we had openly gay people in the French Quarter. Some of my parents knew people that were gay. So for me, it wasn't, and then my aunt lived in Tampa. So at the time in the 70s, this wasn't taboo for me because right. I had seen it.
Right.
But I was my own norm my own freak because my parents were one of the few that were divorced in the 70s.
Right.
And at the time, that was very taboo. By the 80s, not so much, but the 70s.
Right. And I think I should have clarified that, even to say in our country, because in Africa, it's still very, kind of conservative, much of that, or in India, certain areas of the world. But, it is part of that process, I think, as we're coming about. So, the other, well, anyhow, yeah, that's good.
I was just going to say, but you also in some of those countries still have arranged marriages. Right. I had a guest on the show that talked about how she has a charity to educate girls. So therefore their father can't sell them for whatever reason, so we can get a cow for the family or some cash. You wouldn't think in this day and age that is still occurring, but it is.
Yeah. And the positive thing about social media, because they have the internet, because they have these things, people have learned, like in Iran. I mean, the people love the United States. They love the music. They love all that on the internet. Now, the leaders are still very stuck in that old way. But someday there's going to be as they've had that in some other countries like Egypt and other ones, there's going to be that movement because freedom, people want freedom and knowledge. And the positive thing about the internet is it's opened people up to be more connected and to hear other ideas and points of view. So, I'm a hopeful person. I know a lot of people think, and we're in a difficult time. It's a challenging time that things are polarized. People maybe feel divided, and especially if you watch the news. But that again, you watch the news, you just have to watch because those people are all trying to make money. They're just inflating things. You have to be responsible about what you want to let come into your mind, what you want to have come in, because there's a lot of stuff out there. So what will you choose to listen and to let come in to feed your mind and your soul?
It's infotainment, and a lot of it is fear-based. I mean, ratings, when CNN decided to go 24/7, news changed. And when they repealed the doctrine about being fair and balanced, all bets were off. And so I go back to a movie from the 90s called Wag the Dog.
Yeah.
It's a good movie, and I think people should check it out. I'm not saying that what we see is fake, but just like anything, especially now with technology, everything can be skewed.
Well, and, when TV wrestling first came out, and I used to watch all of them, we thought it was real.
My grandmother
still
thought it was real till the day she died.
Well, and there are some people who still do, but the majority of people, let's say 80% of the people, know it's entertainment. News today is like TV wrestling. I mean, that's what it is. So there will come a time, and it's even coming, where we go, just because you say this doesn't make it true. I better do my own investigation. I better do my own stuff, and that's, but I mean, I can remember 25 years ago, somebody coming to me with all these tapes and books saying the Holocaust never happened because somebody wrote it saying it wasn't there. And I'm just like, how can you deny this? But in his mind,
well, the flat earth thing. I mean, I've seen pictures outside the Concorde jet, where you can go look this up and you can see the horizon, between space and Earth. But hey, and there's a curvature there. But hey, it's round. I mean, no, it's flat.
Right.
This is what people are believing. It's like, how do you... my favorite meme about the flat earth thing was when a solar eclipse happened. And they're like, there's the moon that's round, and then there's the earth that's flat. It just doesn't work. So.
And, that's that fine line of, again, having my point of view, somebody who thinks the earth is flat, and somehow still respecting them, valuing them as a human being, because to diminish them as a person, it's the same way on the news. MSNBC diminishes all these people on Fox, and Fox does that to these people. All that does is split us and make people feel diminished, feel angry, and want to fight. And, there's nothing really healthy in that conversation there. And so I encourage people, to listen to one another, to be open to learning, as far as, in your journey. I wish we had more time. I'd love to hear your journey, how you came from your background to now reading cards and tarot cards. A lot of people don't know anything about that, but it's a new expression and understanding. And I've been open to spiritual intuitives, and coming out of a very conservative background, I chose to be open and ask questions and value other people's points of view. Might not be my thing, but you are a valued person, no matter who you voted for or what your belief is.
Well, and that's the thing I learned, because before my husband passed, I was very much a person that would post memes trying to get my point across. And then I realized at a certain point, it's like, you're not doing anything except alienating people.
Yes.
And when you really think about this, if you go back in history, if we look back in history, when we had all these wars, wasn't it all about somebody's opinion that diminished somebody else?
And also about power and wanting to have, sometimes people have a thing that they believe most of the wars were about religion, and they weren't. only 12% of all the wars were religion based, but it was something, it was, the wars were about people wanting to have power, wanting to, have their own, what, for money or greed or all those things. And that's part of our evolution, part of our raising of our consciousness.
Well, and the reason why I said diminishment is because in order to come into power, sometimes we have to create a divide. And when you look at what we've gone through here in this country in the last 10 years, we have had the media create this divide, this narrative. When you look at what happened at 9/11, we were all pretty much, most of us, there was some people that were bashing other people that shouldn't, but for the most part, we all came together. We were all one. And now we are so divided because of politics and because of this opinion and that opinion. And it's like, where do we get here and how do we stop this? And I've talked about this before on the show. It's like, we label things too. That's the other thing. It's like you put somebody in a label, give them a label, put them in a box, and then you discard them because they don't look right. And I've said this before on the show, and it's like, we look at people as if we are looking at a book cover. Oh, I like that book. I want to read that book, but I'm not going to read the blurb. So even though this is a really bad cover and it's a really great book, I didn't read the blurb, so I didn't want to learn about the person. So that person can just go away. I'm just going to look at the fancy cover and stick with them. And they have no value. I'm not saying that. I'm just going to use this as an analogy. But this person has no substance. But they're pretty, but this person doesn't look like I want to deal with them.
Right. That's right. And I think that is the challenge, of course. And especially if you haven't met anybody who's Muslim and all you have is you hear about ISIS, which is only 10,000 of the Muslims, 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. Most are very peace-loving people, want to get along, want to have their children raised. But if the media perpetuates it, and then the TV shows, because I love watching NSCIS, and those shows. But what you realize is they have a certain slant. And, that's all part of this change. And part of it is a white male, because we've had a patriarch society. White men have been in positions of power, and we've been in positions to make those decisions, to write history. And now as things are changing, many of us, other men, feel threatened. Now, I say to my friends, why are you feeling threatened? Because you're sharing power now. You still have your own power, your own power of who you are. But that's the change. And it is part of that. I celebrated the diversity of our country, men and women sharing in leadership roles together, but that change of power is difficult. And it doesn't really just white men. I had some friends who were on the south side of Indianapolis, and it was primarily a Hispanic community, and the Chin community from Burma moved in. And the people who are Hispanics go, I don't like it because these people are moving in, and it's all about fear of the unknown and people we don't know. But once you get to know somebody on a one-to-one relationship, that's when really healing and peace can begin.
Don't you find it interesting, though, that they named him ISIS? ISIS after, here we are, a patriarchal society, and we use a female goddess.
Yeah.
And they're not really, we decided to make that stick. Why did you guys decide to take a goddess? Which nobody ever will look at that goddess and think the same way. I mean, I grew up watching the Shazam ISIS Hour as a kid. So I understood what ISIS was. So for them to take and stick ISIS on it, it kind of annoyed me, to be quite honest.
And I'm not even sure what their meaning of ISIS was, Mm-hmm. I know that they wanted to go back to the 18 or 1500s when they were the dominant, they had a certain idea of what Islam was supposed to be, which was not the teachings of Muhammad, by the way. And as his intent was not that, we will have what they wanted to have, or even people who are in Afghanistan or the Taliban. The teachings of Muhammad went because the people who, the nomadic tribes, were worshiping sun gods and earth gods, and he wanted them to know there was one God. And he was trying to help them, again, understand about the sense of one God that brings us all together. Now, over the years, as we've come to realize, I talk with people, I said, whether you call God higher power, universal intelligence, or even, you say I'm agnostic, I don't know what's out there. Because I'll say, I don't know what's out there either, so maybe I'm agnostic. More, it's acknowledging, that love at the center, I think, of the universe, that which draws beyond us, that draws us together. And that's why, I wrote my book, because I wanted to take the scriptures from the Hindu scriptures, Buddhist scriptures, the Baha'i scriptures, Sikh scriptures, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. And when you see these teachings from all these different faith traditions that were of different thousands of years apart, different geographical areas, that they come up with these very similar teachings, to me, it reinforces that there is this wisdom, a universal wisdom, something beyond us that is wanting us to know about how to care and love one another and come to a better sense of enjoyment of the world.
Then I have to ask this, and don't take offense, please.
No.
So did you look at Wicca? Did you look at pagan?
Sure. Wicca. I have no problem with Wicca.
Well, because the reason why I ask this is because some of the Christian traditions, from my studies, some of the Christian traditions were taken from pagan holidays.
Of course. And, and again, if you really know Wiccan, I have a good friend, and I feel bad. They're probably the most persecuted in the United States.
And their whole read is whatever you put out there is going to come back at you threefold. So when you mentioned that earlier, that was my first thought. So go ahead.
No, I mean, we're understanding about Mother Earth and care of the earth. The Native Americans had a lot of the same understanding of Wiccan, care for the earth. They called it the Great Spirit. But really, and for me, even if you don't believe in something beyond, that's okay. What's more important is what will you do with your life here? How will you treat others? Because you can create heaven on earth or hell on earth. And a lot of it is, what will I want to manifest? What do I want to focus on and be intentional with? And that's what I'm always about, trying to help people know that goodness of themselves, because I grew up with a lot of shame and guilt. I grew up with a lot of worry and feeling like it never was enough. And, when you live with that type of burden in your life, it's a dark place. It's hard. And now, you see the sense of joy and love and peace that I think we can have as we live that out. Oh, I love life now, but I didn't always love life.
But is that kind of why you decided you wanted to be an actor and you wanted to go out? Because was there an escape involved? Was there, because you were looking for outside validation? I mean, were you hoping that, getting this outside validation, becoming a successful actor, that you were going to end up being somebody and that would be enough to fill you? Is That's that right. Why you were seeking this out?
Yes, it was. And of course, as I've gotten to know people who are in the entertainment business, what they find is once they got there, it didn't resolve the issue. The emptiness inside never will get from outside affirmation. It is something we work on. I used to, when people would give me a compliment, I'd go, oh, no big deal. Oh, no. I would negate the affirmation because I'd say inside, I didn't believe, one, I was worthy. And two, it's like, if they really knew me, they knew that, oh, that isn't really the real Jerry, is this, dirty kid who, really is a screw up. So part of what I began doing was letting those affirmations come in and just letting them be. I talk about the critic voice. One of the chapters in my book, In the Peacemaker's Path, is about loving yourself, because that critic voice inside of us is that voices from the past, either from your parents or society. And we listen to the critic voice sometimes more than we do anybody else. That voice that says, oh, you're lazy. What do you think you're doing? You can't really do that. Oh, yes, da-da-da-da-da. It's never enough. And that voice we let stay rent free in our brain. And it just makes us miserable. And we don't have to let it stay rent free. We can change our thoughts and control what we will think and focus on. That, for me, was a new understanding. I just used to hear those voices and think, oh, that's who Jerry is. And then I realized just because those voices, I mean, not voices, but, the tapes, those thoughts coming through were just somebody else's. They were my father saying I was lazy because he was so driven. He didn't want to be lazy, and he didn't want me to be lazy. So he'd say, get off your butt and work, you lazy butt, And I thought I was lazy until later I go, look at all I've done. I've got a master's degree, 2 books, all these things. And I go, I'm not lazy. Where did that come from?
Well, it's interesting because I watched a movie yesterday called Reminisce, and it was an okay movie. But there was 2 takeaways that I will share one at least. And it talks about the past. And he says in there, he's like, the past does not haunt us. We chase our past.
Ah.
And it's true because, yes, that voice comes back in our head, but we're the ones that are allowing those thoughts to go there. We are the ones, they're not coming back to us. Those thoughts are long behind us, but yet we allow that to come into our mind.
And this is an interesting, just for somebody to think about who's listening. The person has the most power in your life is the person who you have not forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness is such an important part of our past, letting go of the past. Forgiveness of ourselves and forgiveness for others. Forgiveness is very difficult. It's something, but to me, it's one of the most important spiritual principles. It begins with starting to have some empathy, understanding. When I finally understood about my father, why was my father so driven? Why was he, finally had a nervous breakdown at 52? Because he had an 8th grade education. He always felt inadequate about himself. So he had to prove himself over and over again because he didn't feel that way about himself. So I understood where his drivenness now came from and why he put that on me. So I could forgive him as I learned to forgive myself.
That's one thing, I've talked about too, is you always have to look at your parents, the generational aspect of your parents, because your grandparents were not the grandparents that you knew. And, the one other thing that we don't do with ourselves, we're not gracious with ourselves. We are hard with ourselves. We are hard on ourselves, and we will pick out our flaw, even though nobody else can see it. We will go back to the moment that we should not have, we made a bad choice. But the funny thing is sometimes we end up exactly where we need to be because of that choice.
Well, and I think that point about grace is maybe one of the most important things of our whole conversation. When people will say, Jerry, what would you want the 30-year-old Jerry to know? I would say, I wish I had been easier on myself. I wish I'd given myself some grace. That when I screwed up, I did my best. Nobody intentionally gets married to get divorced. Okay, they get divorced, but they did the best they could. So many times my friends who got divorced felt shame and guilt and like a failure because they got divorced. And, again, we do things in life and we did our best and we grew from them if we allow ourselves to grow from it. But give ourselves some grace, be easier on ourselves, build ourselves up, and try to put people in your life who will help build you up rather than tear you down.
And here's something I have to say about this. When you think about it, as you were talking, this came to me. It's like, if we took the label out of divorce, if we took that word out and we removed it, then the shame is removed. And I've dealt with this with the word widow, because widow sets you up to be scammed in some situations. I really don't use it. I usually prefer to say I'm single.
Yeah.
I love somebody. I love them until the day they died. Is that anybody else's business?
Right.
But statisticians need to know this. Why?
Yeah.
Because I love somebody. And if, yes, I share it here openly. But the fact of the matter is, if I were just not having a podcast, I wouldn't be out there advertising, hey, I'm a widow. It's nobody else's business.
Right. Right. It's like my friends who are gay. They don't want to be known as a gay Christian or as this or that. They just want to be known as who they are, you know. Being gay is only part of their life. It doesn't define them. We want to, you know, again, we want to put people in categories and groups, and that's just unhealthy. And so the best thing we can do, that I try to do, is to be open and listen and learn, and try to find common connection with people.
I mean, if you think about it, let's just say this. So the way our society works, it's like we're still, I don't want to say it's still a caste society, but it's like we want to sit you there and then we want to put a label across each thing that you are. Well, why? Why can't I just be me? Why do I have to have these little boxes for you to check and go, okay, so you do this, 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 and this. How about I'm just a human being? Well,
and that's part, again, of our own human development. We are tribal. You know, I mean, for the early days, we're still tribal people. Mm-hmm. People, you know, I go Indianapolis. We're the Indianapolis Colts. We root for them against this other team. You know, there's something about being a part of this group. And so there is a caste system. There's a social economic caste system in our society. You know, there's a race, sexuality. Those are all kind of part of those systems that keep us either above or below. And I think the more we become conscious of it, like we are doing, like sexual harassment has come, and you know, out in the entertainment business, that power, that men had power over women, as we bring these things to light, racism in our society, it's painful. It's painful, but there's something also good about bringing it into the light. And mental health, as we have those conversations. And so the more conversation we can have without shaming and guilt, and just being able to try to unpack that and learn about those things, we can come to a better way of living with one another.
So let's go back, before we wrap this all up, let's go back to you being out in Los Angeles. So you went out to Los Angeles. Did you know anybody when you went out there, or did you just pack your bags and say, I'm going?
I did. I packed my bags. I was 23. My sister, who I wasn't really close to, lived out there. And so she did help me get in an apartment, but I didn't know anybody in the entertainment business. So I was very naive. And you know, that was part of that. But I really got out of the entertainment business because I wasn't mature enough to handle all of those temptations, all those parts. I mean, I think somebody who's in the entertainment business, who knows himself and can build relationships, I mean, you know, you can do it. It's a wonderful world. I mean, I used a lot of my theater background still in my life, in other avenues as I became a minister. But I also found I went into the theater was more to try to find my personal affirmation. And when I left that, began my own spiritual journey of awakening and looking inward, that's where I needed to be. You know, that's what I've been doing in my life. And I find a greater fulfillment. And it's been wonderful for me. But, you know, that's my journey. That was my journey I needed to be on.
So how did you end up from LA to Carmel?
Well, I mean, when I got out of theater, I ended up teaching high school speech and theater in Peru, Indiana. I was going to buy a theater of my own and try to have it a different way. And I walked into this church because I thought all churches were like the church I grew up with. But my parents now had left all that legalism. They were in a Methodist church, and it was a little more open. And so I walked into this church. It was a Christian church, Disciples of Christ, and I didn't know any difference. But here I saw men and women in leadership roles. And here I heard about the love of God. And so I started following that a little more. And then I went to seminary really more to put my faith together. I believed in God, and I didn't believe in all this stuff, but I wanted to have a faith of integrity that I could understand. And there was something drawing me, but I love to study and read. And so that's when I began the journey. And then I worked in the inner city as a youth minister. And I loved working with kids who came out of difficult backgrounds. And then I became a solo pastor, preaching and teaching, working in interfaith. And that's always been my passion, trying to help bring people together who are from different backgrounds to find a brand of healing. I've done it over racial issues, sexual orientation, and interfaith. And so that was part of the journey, and ended up was in a very large church in Kentucky. My wife is a minister. We met in seminary, and we had a big church. And then I came to Carmel because my grandkids were here. My daughter was here, and it was a smaller church. And like some of my friends were like, "Did you get in trouble because you left the big church to come to a small church?" About that success model.
Yeah.
And I went, no. I mean, and I had to learn how to get out of that numbers thing as even a minister, because that was the criteria. If you had a bigger church, you were a better minister. And I fought against that so long, and people would ask me, how many people did we have on Sunday morning in church? And I went, I don't know, and I don't care, because that's not what it's about. It's about relationships. And so, my life, somebody asked me, because, my books and my speaking engagements, oh, are you a millionaire? And I go, yeah, I'm very wealthy. I'm a millionaire. You are? He said, well, I only have $2,000 in my savings account, but I'm a millionaire in blessings. I mean, my life has been so blessed because of the relationships as I travel around the world and have friends in India and Europe and England. And just, I wouldn't give it up. No, I mean, I've turned down some jobs that I could have made a lot more money than being a minister, but I would have been so unhappy. And so I feel blessed.
Well, and let's be honest, there are a lot of people out there that have written a lot of books that are ministers and we talked a little bit about it earlier, they are doing it to make as much money as they can.
Sure.
And if somebody's relating to that message, then awesome, let them. But you're doing it for the reasons that validate you. You're doing it to fill you, to fill your heart. And I mean, here's the thing. Yes, your theater background and going out and having that experience in Hollywood, that helped you no matter how you look at it, because it ended up teaching you things about yourself.
Yeah, and I'm not saying money is bad. If somebody gets famous and they do this and wonderful. But I can tell you that the challenges are, the more money you have, the difficulty of losing yourself. Because now when you have a lot of money, people who all want a piece of that and want to do that. And so, it's all in perspective, and as long as you keep that in perspective, which is why I've always tried to give some of what I make to other causes, to invest in other things beyond myself, because it makes me feel like I'm a part of that. So just for me, I'm at a peace and a joy in my life better than I've ever been, and it's been a good. And I'm looking forward to the next stages.
Well, the books I write, when you're talking about, the things that in Hollywood, yes, the books I write are set in Hollywood. They're set in the music industry. And yes, there's drugs. There's a lack of privacy. And ultimately, the thing is, there's still people. And I think that's what people kind of lose track of. When you put somebody out there in the entertainment industry, they're on a pedestal. And they have everything coming at them, and everybody wants a piece of them. Goes back to that transactional thing you were talking about. And how do you know what's real?
Well, and I have some wealthy friends. I've been in churches where I've had very wealthy people. And the security that they have, because they're afraid of somebody stealing all of their jewels and all that stuff. And then the issues with the kids, and the kids want to have, this big wedding, and they want these things because dad has all this money. And wow.
Yeah.
It's
a total, while it seems great, it's funny because I read something recently or watched something recently, and there was somebody talking about winning the lottery. It's like most people that win the lottery, they're broke within 2 years.
Yeah. There's a TV show called Successions on HBO, and it's about some famous news Murdoch, I think, and it's so good. It's so good because these people have so much money, but it's so sick and deviant, and I mean, wow, it's like Mother Teresa said about the United States. We materialistic are one of the richest in the world, and spiritually, we were one of the poorest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to invite people to look inward to find that connection. I love in the Hindu and the Buddhist tradition, they say namaste and they bow to one another. And the meaning of the word namaste is, I bow to the divine within you as you bow to the divine within me. If we could recognize the divine within each person and help to connect with that, how powerful would that be for our world?
It would be amazing. And the other caveat to that is, if we could step away from the fear-based food news and everything that's fed to us constantly, because when you think about it, our thoughts are going to this negative place. Therefore, what are we creating in this world? We're not creating a world of love. We're creating a world of alienation.
Yeah.
So that.
And there are people who we work with. I'm sure some of your listeners, there are people who they work with who go, I can't find the divine within that person. That person is a a-hole, and they're jerk to me. And then it's some of that understanding where that person is, what's going on in their life that making them be like that. Not that you have to put up with abuse and you should set boundaries and not let somebody diminish you, but also don't take it personally, because that's that person who's going through a lot of their own demons. And so if you can not take it personally, but in fact, find some way to engage them in a positive way, it can change a relationship. I mean, it's amazing. There are some people who irritated me and who I just don't want to be around. And then finally something shifted, something happened, and they were in a different mood, a more positive mood I was, and we connected in a different way. And then when I saw them from then on, it was, I couldn't believe it.
Well, it goes back to looking at that book cover, because we sit there and we will judge somebody based on that one moment. And the fact of the matter is, that's not always who they are. If they're having a bad day, I mean, my husband, if he was frustrated because he was legally blind and he was doing something, he would curse, and I'd go in there and go, are you okay? And then he would make some kind of glib comment of like, your name's not MF, is it? And so I'd walk out, and as a 20-year-old, I most likely would have challenged him right then and there and went off on him. As a 50-year-old, I'm like, I'm just going to walk away. I'll be fine. I come back a half hour later and I'm like, so, you okay? Yeah, it wasn't you. It was. And that's the thing. I think we are so reactionary. We're taught to be reactionary because, if you caught your parents, and somebody made a good point the other day, is that we need to allow kids to have those moments where they're not happy. We need to allow kids to have those genuine feelings. Your generation, my generation, we're told, if you cry, I'll give you something to cry about. You were not allowed to cry. You were not allowed to voice your opinion. For if you voiced your opinion, you were going to get in a serious amount of trouble.
Right. And that's the same way with sadness and depression, anger. If we can allow people to voice that, and it's okay. And don't take it personally, to understand that that's part of our mental health, and really understanding, so there's no shame when people feel depression, because we all feel depression. And of course, we don't want to talk about it because it makes me feel weak, like because I'm somehow crazy, and those words that we put stigma to, rather than when somebody is having those feelings, to listen and acknowledge that, so that you, when you were 50, you didn't take it personally and you let that person have that. Now, if somebody's at your job and they're just diminish you over and over again and they put you down, there's sometimes you have to defend yourself, to set a boundary and to not let that person do that. I mean, but there's a way of doing that without over, reacting or coming back to them as bad as they are to you. And that's the real challenge, isn't it?
Well,
I love the story. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I love the story of Winston Churchill and Gandhi, because Gandhi hated cigar smoke and he was irritated by Winston Churchill. And, so if you're beside somebody who smokes cigars and it's obnoxious, it's easy like to get over against them. So what did Gandhi do? He said to Winston Churchill, let me light your cigar for you. And he found a way of actually the thing that annoyed him the most. He found a way to find something about the cigar, lighting it and giving it to Winston Churchill that changed his perspective of it. And also his relationship with Winston Churchill changed. I thought, now that is a wise man.
It is. And I want to go back to something, you also have to be willing to, sometimes taking your power back, like that story there, isn't about you being vocal about it or being harsh about it. I remember a review I got. I had a lot of illness and Katrina happened. So I missed work because I had to take care of my grandmothers and stuff. And I get this review. And my boss at the time she liked to play being a power position. And she hands me my review and I read it. And yes, I was seething on the inside. I was very upset. And she looks at me and she goes, do you have anything to say? And all I could do was look at her and say, it is what it is. And she looked at me, she goes, you don't have anything else to say? I'm like, no, it is what it is. Granted, I went home and I was going to write a letter and I was all upset, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of taking my power, because that's what that was about. It wasn't about my job. It was about her trying to, how do I say, prove that she was an HBIC. Right. I don't know. And it's right. Just like, I'm not going to give you that power. And it annoyed her. Yeah. Because here's the thing. With my reaction, and that's how I knew it was about power for her, she should have just let it drop. But she was baiting me to tell her something.
That's right. And that's where, I had in my first church, and I was a young minister and 34 or whatever. And he was a military, retired Marine. And he treated everybody like that. And he just was so just bad to me in the board meetings in different ways. And so after the meeting, and I went outside, I was seething. I'm like, I'm going to go home. And I said, I'm going to unload on my wife. I went back into the church, and here he was with his buddy. And I said, look, I'm not going to have you talk to me that way and diminish me, because, and then he went on and then he said, you're this young punk minister who comes in there. And I just stood my ground against him. And I said, you're not going to do it. I'm not going to allow it. If I'm the pastor here, I'm going to be the one who's going to be in charge of the meeting, and you will not be at a meeting and do that. Now, he quit the church and left, and that was fine. But more, I was going to stand for myself without diminishing him, going off. But it was the hardest thing in my whole life I've ever done. But it was important for me to do, to stand up to that.
It's like you have to, no matter what you do, no matter the situation, you have to take a moment, step back. Like you walked away. The thing is, sometimes you have to walk away to get a different perspective and reframe it before you claim claim your stake. Because otherwise, if you're doing it in the heat of the moment, you're becoming reactionary and you may not get your message across.
Well, and there's a risk factor. When I was out in LA in the entertainment business in 1980, everybody's doing coke. And I was supposed to go to this party where everybody's doing coke. And I knew I had such an addictive personality. I didn't want to do coke because I got hooked like nothing, right? I was already smoking cigarettes. I was already drinking alcohol. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And the person who was the director and all this stuff, it was clear, I'm on the out. I'm not going to get in that part. I'm not going to get into them because I'm looked at as too clean or too goody two shoes or whatever. And I made that choice, and it was okay, and I just think, it's so easy to lose your soul. It's so easy for your character to get compromised. And that's what I mean about those temptations. And we do that. I did that for a long time in my 20s, into my 30s. And then I started wanting to claim it and coming back. So, it's about not beating up on ourselves, giving ourselves some grace and saying, what can I learn from this? But I don't want to be like this, and I want to move into a future.
Yeah. So is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to add?
Well, I think our whole conversation, and let me say I appreciate your what you offer, and as I've listened to your other podcast, and I think as your listeners are here, people who are wanting to be open-minded and growing, that my book, The Peacemaker's Path, Multi-Faith Reflections to Deepen Your Spirituality, you can see the cover there in the background, but this book, I've taken kind of my work of interfaith work. I've taken the themes from all of the major religions, and because most of us haven't read the Quran or the Sikh scriptures or the Buddhist teachings or the Baha'i scriptures. So I've written 40-day reflection. So it's a 40-day kind of devotional. You can take one day and read it. And I have one of the themes on forgiveness or on listening or on patience. And then I'll have the scriptures from all of the faith traditions. And then I'll have a prayer from a faith leader. And then I'll have some questions for you to reflect on. The wonderful part about it, even somebody who's not very religious, I think will find benefit because of the core teachings or core values of how to self-improve ourselves and bring healing to the world. And so people can go to my website, jerryzehr.com, or find it on Amazon, The Peacemaker's Path, Multi-Faith Reflections to Deepen Your Spirituality. And I look forward to any people want to have dialogue with me. I just want them, your listeners, to know that if they're feeling a little down, a little disengaged, a little disillusioned, don't give up, because God has a better thing in store for you, and God will bring people into your life who will help empower you and know you are loved.
True. Well, I thank you for your time, Jerry.
Thank you, and blessings to all.
So the episode, we delved a lot into religion, and as he said, and this is something that I've always thought, most of our religion, we all have these core values in them. They all have a single message, but yet we put it into different guises. And we then fight about it saying, well, your religion's not right. Now, while there are certain differences and certain tweaks in each religion, the core of it all is the same. I hope today that you weren't so put off because it is such a religious conversation, and I hope you gained something from it. If you like the show, as always, leave a review. You can leave a review on Podchaser. You can leave a review on Apple. Tell your friends about the show. And if you want to be a guest on the show, please send me a message. Or if you have a comment, send me a message at donna@better2podcast.com, or leave a comment on our YouTube page. If you want to check out any of the other episodes of the podcast, please go to www.better2podcast.com. So on that note, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye. Audio production done by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio.